Okay, everybody, Jason Alexander back with you from Sales Search Partners, and it looks like we're good to go. I have our presenter on the line here, so before I do a quick intro, I just want to make sure his audio works properly. Dan Demers, can you hear us okay? And if you can say hi, I'll confirm back that we can hear you.
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear, and hopefully everyone can do the same with me.
Perfect. So I'm going to do a quick introduction of Sales Search Partners. For those of you that don't know, we're a company that focuses entirely on recruiting professionals in the sales industry around Massachusetts and New Hampshire. We've got offices in Bedford, New Hampshire, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and Woburn, and focus on a number of different areas in the sales world, ranging from sales inside, sales outside, and sales management. So I know you didn't sign up for a billboard on Sales Search Partners. I'm going to go ahead and fast forward here to the information pertaining to our speaker, Dan Demers. Dan Demers is founder and principal consultant of Remission Consulting. Remission Consulting is a consulting company that we partner with on a regular basis and provides services ranging from sales and management training tied to measurable outcome and results, leadership and employee engagement consulting, presentations on sales presentations, training, and consulting. And this is an organization that's worked with organizations that we've heard of before, such as Unitil, Bank of America, U.S. Navy SEALs, People's United Bank, and a number of others. So before I set the microphone back over to Dan, a couple of quick housekeeping items. So as to avoid background noise, I have everybody's microphone on mute, but we do encourage questions throughout the presentation. In your GoToMeeting client that's sitting on your desktop, there's a small area where you can type in a question to the presenters. So if you have questions during the presentation, feel free to type them in. I'll try to interject them between slides if possible, or at the end. And in the event we don't get to all of the questions during the session, because we want to make sure we get you out of here by about 5 or 10 of 1 onto your next meetings, we'll be sure to be following up with you offline. We'll also make a copy of this presentation available to you offline, as well as contact information for Dan directly, because he's going to come up with a lot of great points, but I'm sure you might have questions for him or possibly want to engage with him after the fact. So with no further ado, Dan, I'm going to go ahead and turn the stage over to you, and we can go from there.
Great. Thanks a lot, Jason. Always a pleasure working with you and the folks that you bring to these webinars. Love to get started. So today's conversation is designed to address some of the more typical challenges and issues that we see when we work with sales organizations inside client firms. Today we'll take a very quick, like Jason said, this is not a billboard for Sales Search Partners, nor is it for Remission, but I will tell you a little bit about our team and about what we do and my background. And then we'll dive in and take a quick look at what we see is what many sales teams getting right and what many sales teams get wrong, both from a performance and from a leadership and management perspective. And then we'll take a look at those issues through the lens of forecasting, budget, and creating sales plans. And then we're going to talk about some key items that we see elevating performance consistently. And that's specifically coaching to goals and managing to standards, and how goals and standards are aligned, but very different things. We'll give you some key takeaways, and I'll share with you a couple of case studies on how teams have applied some of these concepts to see some really just phenomenal, nothing short of phenomenal results. So what we're also going to be doing is you'll hear from me to toggle things forward to Jason as we drive the webinar forward. So with that, Jason, if you wouldn't mind moving ahead. He already mentioned a little bit about some of the teams that we work with. We do engage clients and oftentimes enter into confidentiality agreements, so this is by no means an inclusive list, but it's a sampling of the types of firms that we've worked with. We've had the unique pleasure of training the Navy SEALs and some Green Berets as well over the years, and it's always fun to apply those lessons. We learn as much from them as we aim to teach them, but we can move forward to the next slide. So very quickly, Remission Consulting, we apply a comprehensive approach looking at primarily best practices in different tactical areas, as well as motivation and employee engagement concepts, and we overlay those with some highly impactful training and coaching and management skills for the leaders of our client firms, which we have found leads to some very significant increases in performance. That's the core of what we do, and very, very, very quickly on how we do it. So we can move forward, Jason, if you could. Performance management. So when we apply the concepts of typical performance management to the role of sales, one of the things that is obvious, it kind of falls under the category of duh. Sales is one of the most measurable and quantifiable business performance areas when you look across an enterprise. And what's remarkable is how many client firms take a look at their typical sales cycle or their customer experience, however you use your languaging to describe it, and oftentimes will begin to measure things that they have measured, or they'll look at things from a very past-oriented viewpoint. And one of the things that I'd like to do with you all today is help you see how we look at sales organizations. So again, it's ultimately measurable. There's typically very, very good data collection, more so than any other element of a business. You have clearly identifiable, within that sales cycle, what we call clearly identifiable moments of truth or key leading indicators for future success. We'll spend a little bit of time on that today. That's really one of the most key areas, if you're going to take anything away from today's webinar, is beginning to understand when are the moments of truth in your sales pipeline, in your sales cycle, so that you can find the correct ones and really center on coaching and training your team to be very, very effective on those key leading indicators. And then ultimately, within sales organizations, there's typically already existing channels for feedback, and oftentimes those channels for feedback are not used as optimally as they could to elevate consistent performance. Myself, having spent nearly 10 years as an outside salesperson and a market manager for a business-to-business supply chain company, and then again another 10 years as a sales manager and executive for my own firm, I can attest to the fact that many leaders use sales feedback as a whipping post. It often shows up like a very either congratulatory conversations around pending or imminent or just achieved success, or the threat and the stick of someone who's fallen behind. So when we look at the sales pipeline and the cycle of your industry in specifics, we aim to find those leading indicators of success so that you can start to focus where the attention needs to be given so that teams and individuals have more and more success. And lastly, on this slide, we talk a lot about planning, organizing, and measuring as key aspects of performance management. The essence of sales lends itself very nicely to that. And when we move beyond what we see as the typical approach of a top-down management style, with our next slide, we're going to take a look at what often is done poorly, but how you can begin to apply these normal and almost, it's a de facto reality that there's all of these metrics available, how we can apply them so that we can fix what a lot of teams don't get right. So again, if you could toggle forward for us, Jason. Where we see a lot of teams having some issue is the tremendous amount of research that's been done relative to professional motivation, white-collar employee engagement, and how to maximize the potential within each team member and within teams as a group themselves. A lot of credence and past experience tells us that the #1 motivator for salespeople is money. What the actual science and the sociological studies that have been done on what motivates not just salespeople, but all white-collar workers, money typically ends up being either number 4, 5, or 6 in most respondents' studies. What we find consistently from Gallup to Towers Watson to Accenture, a variety of different sources all tell us that autonomy, mastery, and purpose are the sustainable, most highly motivating factors that drive white-collar workers. It's not that we don't want to have a clear path to commission. It's critical. It's the nature of sales, and we do want to incentivize people around that. But what we see is being done poorly, and where the big mistakes are, is sales leaders and managers fail to take into account this drive for autonomy, mastery, and purpose as key to keeping team members engaged and having the team members give us the very best that they can. Additionally, and hopefully there aren't many of you on the call here who've fallen into this trap, but we see this time and time again. We see the top performers inside organizations are nearly always the individuals who end up getting promoted up to sales leadership or management. And probably for every client firm we've worked with, there has been regret with decisions made in this regard for 2 main reasons. Number one, typically great performers do not often have inherent leadership skills. They tend to be lone wolves. And more importantly for the business, taking a top performer out of day-to-day production and putting them into management, you end up with a massive bottom line hit because their performance suffers as they struggle and dedicate greater time to managing. Some of the very best firms that we've worked with that have highly successful sales management, as well as continued success with top performers, is finding non-sales professionals to step into sales management and leadership. Perhaps they have been in sales enablement, they've been in business development, or even marketing or other fields. They have a sense of the tempo and the rhythm and the challenges salespeople face, and they equally have great management and leadership skills, or they are inclined to learn and eager to become a great manager. But this is probably one of the biggest challenges and mistakes that we see on a practical basis. Additionally, all or nothing accountability. What we mean here is oftentimes, as I alluded to a moment ago, we'll see management have a congratulatory mode. So there's a switch, and the up on that switch is congratulations and excitement and ringing a bell, and the down of that switch, that position 2 in a binary positioning system, is disciplinary. It's very much punitive in nature when sales team members don't have an adequate pipeline or aren't producing adequate results. Where we see a massive miss in sales managers spending tremendous amount of time with their bottom 10 or 15% performers and their top 10 or 15% performers is missing on that mass in the middle of consistent, steady eddies, people who are making things happen, perhaps not shining stars, but they're consistent performers. They're not rock stars. It's in that massive chunk of sales team members in the middle where most sales managers don't spend enough time. With this all or nothing accountability, they miss out on the chance to coach up those folks in the middle so that they can begin to elevate their game. And the last thing that we see as being a significant challenge in most every sales organization, very few, some I hate to use the word progressive, I certainly don't mean it in a political context, but there are some organizations that have bought into employee engagement as a cultural theme, and they see goals as being very different from sales standards, and they allow their team members to set their own goals. Here is a massive place to improve performance and engage team members with autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Being crystal clear on standards of performance, quotas, if you will. Some teams call them performance nut. You've got to hit your $1 million a year, 250 per quarter, or X number of units per month sold. Your core standard of performance, and empowering sales team members and regions collectively to come up with their own aspirational goals. What would be a key level, what would be a potential level of performance above and beyond the standard? One executive was so blown away by the approach and astounded that the entirety of the team came up with goals far greater than he and his executive colleagues would have ever imagined. And greater than a year down the road, subsequent to those goal-setting sessions, more sales team members had performed above standard than in the entire history of their organization. So I want to repeat that because that's probably one of the most critical pieces of input, especially this time of year. We're entering into planning for 2016 for most of us. When sales team members are allowed to have a clear understanding of their standard or quota and given the resources and time to set their own sales goal, a number that is above their standard, we see consistently sales team members putting forth goals larger than executives would have ever imagined. And based anecdotally, we don't have enough of a client sample size to say empirically, but anecdotally we see consistently sales team members performing above their standard when those kinds of teams are allowed to set their own goals. It gives them a sense of ownership. It gives them that feeling of autonomy, which time and time again leading research firms tell us white-collar workers want. So if we could move to the next slide. Forecast budgets and sales plans. This kind of starts to wrap up the elements that we've begun to discuss and begin to apply them again into some more specific areas where you can take these insights and act on them. I'm sure many of you have seen, whether it's on LinkedIn or other social media, there's a popular meme that says, what are the 6 most dangerous words in business? Well, those are, we've always done it this way. When you see how sales organizations set up their forecasts and their budgets, whether it's month to month or year to year, there's often let's hurry up and get through it because this takes too much time. We just need to get a document together, and we occasionally check in on it. Or even some who take it to the other extreme and they spend tremendous amounts of time on their budgeting and become a slave to that budget. What I almost never see with client firms, and you can ask yourself this question: how often do you take a time out, take a moment to pull the stick back to a higher level of thinking and ask, is this the most effective way to set up our budgeting for next year, or however you do that, if it's quarterly, if it's annually? Is our industry changing faster than we've been able to predict? Are we behind the curve or ahead of the curve? There's a lot of very forward-thinking research available, and there's some great white papers online on how to budget in a more flexible way so that you can have a greater understanding of the changes in your industry and your marketplace. So I just always ask people to question, if you're continuing to do things the way you've always done them, is that going to lead to the best result? And that starts with how you set up your year. The second bullet here is, I've heard this repeatedly. The number sometimes is different, but whenever we get in and work with teams, we've often done some workshops around setting budgets, setting goals, and communicating those goals from the executive to regional management to field sales. There's often this, well, why do we have to spend time doing this? Can't you just auto-populate last year's and throw 15% on top? Which really clearly shows that there's no true thought here. They're just putting a number on top of what they did last year. So when we look at this, as the top line here suggests, command and control versus educe and enroll, what we're for is allowing wherever there is impact to be had on performance. So at the sales player level, can we allow the sales player, the team member individually, to put forth his or her plan, his or her set of goals? Is there communication from management down to the sales team member exactly what the budget needs to look like? What are the changing dynamics in our industry, and specifically for our company, that require us to have 15% growth this year? What are the kinds of dynamic industry movement or changes that are forcing us to go to market differently? And with those kinds of changes, what is it that you as a team, as a region, or as an individual can produce if we provide the resources that you would need to produce? When we look at the tools that a lot of client firms are using here, there's typically some inherent challenges around planning. Most CRMs don't allow for a fully developed relationship management approach. It's very transactional. And again, as an understanding point, looking at things from the top down versus the bottom up, sales team members often have the best insight into the relationships that they're developing. And the tools that we provide them often don't give them the mechanisms to best track them. When we look at relationship management, Remission has designed and deployed a tool that allows teams to measure the 8 different dimensions of a B2B, business-to-business commercial relationship. And how do you track those, whether it's through your CRM, and how do you plan for those to progress and move forward? The resources necessary to support the salesperson in moving that relationship along the line. How do we capture greater contract value year over year with our commercial relationships? Ultimately, what we look at to put a bow on this slide is a team-based and an individual-based EDUCed, or goals that are drawn from the people who are being asked to execute on those goals. Whenever we allow that kind of an approach, we have historically seen greater goal declarations, as well as superior performance relative to standards and towards accomplishing those goals. The last time we had an array of sales team training programs in place through last year, we had 82% of client firms, excuse me, let me rephrase that. 82% of firms' goals were achieved, and goals by definition are bigger, more audacious than standards. And I think it's key to acknowledge that doing it this way, there's a definite benefit to doing it the command and control top-down way. It's fast, it's clean, it's simple, it's easy. Easier, let me rephrase. Allowing teams and individuals to participate and contribute their own goals is, without question, it takes a longer amount of time, it is more complex, and it is messier. But ultimately, time and time again, we see a far better outcome. If we could move forward, please, Jason. Coaching to goals and managing to standards. When we put teams in charge of their own goals and individuals in charge of their own goals, what we end up with is a paradigm shift. And why this is important is critical to understand if any of you were to consider taking this on for the next year or for the next time period that you may be planning around. And I often liken this to the difference between charity and taxes. If you can kind of think through, I know it's a bit of a cognitive dissonance, right? We're talking about sales performance, and I throw charity and taxes at you. But think of it this way: if we give of our checkbooks and of our wallets and of our time to charity, that comes from a place of true choice. We are choosing to contribute to whichever charity we may. Similarly, let me complete that thought first before I move on. So those dollars or those hours that we donate to a charity of our choice serves a unique or necessary purpose. cancer research, feeding the homeless, helping homeless animals, you name it. We are dedicating our time and our money to the charity of our choice. With taxes, on the other hand, there's no choice. You may think that you're choosing to file quarterly or to allow your employer to withhold from your semi-regular paycheck, but there is no choice in the matter. It is compliance. We are obligated by law to pay our taxes. It's part of the social contract we have entered into. But you cannot deny that there is no choice in the matter. Rather, we are compliant in paying those taxes. And it is very circuitous, our impact on how those taxes are spent. Maybe we can vote a person in or out, or maybe we can vote a certain party or another party, or maybe we don't vote. But the fact of the matter is there's a sense of compliance with taxes versus choice when we apply our charitable dollars and time. That exact same difference, that difference of choice versus compliance, is why Gallup and Accenture and Towers Watson and Bain and all of these consulting and research firms tell us allowing team members to set their own goals leads to greater performance more consistently. And that choice, that difference is in the choice. The empowerment, the autonomy we grant, goaling our team members, giving them a goal, is a surefire way to, over time, squash their employee engagement. The employee engagement of sales professionals is ridiculously undermeasured and dismissed because most executives view commission as the be-all and end-all of motivating salespeople. If nothing else, I hope I impress upon you that that is outmoded, outdated, and woefully inadequate to achieving high performance. When we do engage our team members and allow them to set their goals, it's important to craft proper goals. And I'll give you an example of how we do that in a moment. When we build those goals for team members individually and for groups, we must take care to have a very powerful reason behind the goal, or as you see here, why in quotes. What is the why? What is the goal behind the goal? Because this is the heart of the coaching model. If you can understand a team member on your in your sales group is working hard to get his daughter through freshman year of college, and you know that with the spiffs and the incentives and the commissions you've built into your payment, into your compensation plan, you know that that salesperson could stroke a check and handle his daughter's college tuition with one check, or over the course of 3 quarters of high performing, he could significantly impact that. If you can enter into a genuine conversation with that salesperson and he or she shares with you the personal why behind high performance, then you can use that as honest leverage. I don't mean, again, a whipping post. I mean here rather, you work with them and help them visualize and understand the benefit to picking up the phone and making that 5th or 6th or 7th hard call that day. You push them past the 17th no they have received on the last series of RFPs that they've put together. Pushing them and supporting them achieve what it is they say they want is the heart of great coaching. And then the last piece here, which underpins coaching to goals, is clearly defined standards. When we talk about standards, though, I want to ask the question and get you to think through, are your standards defined by behaviors? Are they defined by outcomes? Are they defined by both? When we talk about sales performance and when we consult and assess sales teams' comp plans and how their managers are supporting team members, this is a key area for us to dig and explore. Have you defined in your sales cycle a clearly articulated set of benchmarks along the way to success for your sales team members? As an example, we work with a real estate firm. So what real estate is often, we don't usually get those kinds of clients when we work with sales search partners, but nevertheless, everyone understands real estate by and large. Well, a realtor, we learned, they have a series of different activities they can engage in, but for them, the most important leading indicator of future success, a behavior, if you will, is creating a relationship with a client where the client is asking for the realtor to produce a comparative market analysis, CMA, they call them. So when we were able to dive into the real estate firm's sales process and help them begin to define standards of behavior, the outcome obviously is a house under contract or a house sold where they get the commission. That's the ultimate outcome. But the leading indicator or the behavior that we began to track, identify, and measure and coach around was how do realtors achieve this CMA, and what is the conversion rate or upgrade rate from a CMA to a listing to a closed deal. And we found that on average, when we began to focus on these key leading indicators, these key behavior standards, the entire sales organization began to progress with more deal flow, with greater opportunities in pipeline. And over the course of 18 months, year over year, they increased sales over 100%. Beginning to measure those key behavior standards allowed us to see outcome standards increase. We began to identify what were the minimum behaviors for success. What was it that the realtors needed to do consistently on a daily basis that led to 2 CMAs a month, 4 CMAs a month, 7 CMAs a month? Beginning to break down your sales cycle into easily identifiable and simple milestones gives your sales team members a map for success. And when we begin to communicate and measure these outcomes, the sooner we could see people falling off the standard, the better. We were better able to, and the sales leaders of that organization and other client firms, as soon as they saw a sales team member deviate off of standard sooner, they were able to course correct faster. A moment ago I mentioned many times this kind of communication is too much, too late. It's very, very problematic if you're waiting for formal or informal feedback on an annual basis with sales team members, because on virtually every and any industry that I've ever worked within or touched as a consultant, if the salesperson is getting feedback on an annual basis, that's too much, too late. They can't course correct. It's not relevant to their day-to-day and week-to-week. The sooner we can give feedback, the sooner we identify and understand those behaviors that we can track, those leading indicators for success, the better we're able to help teams have more consistent outcomes. If we could move the next slide, please, Jason. So here's a quick rundown of the way in which we help teams craft goals. Many of you perhaps are familiar with SMART goals. We add a layer to that at Remission. We make them smarter. So if you could just toggle through the animation for us, Jason. The S, as most people know, specific, concrete, tangible, understood, clearly identifiable, measurable. Again, something that people can, without doubt, say yes or no, you achieved it. For us, the A is achievable. And then we go to the R. For us, most teams have R as realistic. We say go with risky. We want achievable and risky to be a nice sort of nice tension between the two. So yes, it's possible, but it's going to require us to grow or move. Obviously, there's a timeline here. For us, a lot of times when we put together, we do a workshop for client firms called the Rapid Results Workshop that is designed around identifying those performance outcomes, those behavior outcomes that are clearly measurable the leading indicators of success. And if you put a 90-day timeline on team members crafting goals around those leading indicators of success, it's a really fun way to jumpstart and to get teams to make their opportunity pipeline just crazy full. So timelines, we typically range 90 days to a year in terms of goal setting. Ethical, I know, call us old-fashioned. We prefer to allow folks to operate in an environment that allows them to be full of integrity. In a B2B environment, it sustains long-term relationships. And then this last R is what we described a moment ago. There must be substance and personal meaning behind an individual's goal, as well as meaning behind team goals. One way that we coach to this, if you're looking to integrate some of these smarter goal processes in your company, if you have questions around this, by the way, of course, you can reach out. We'd be happy to answer questions on how we do it. But we ask why, or a variant of why, at least 5 times as a person is submitting their goal for review. So perhaps the individual is saying, I'd like to sell 20% above last year's sales. Then the first question would be why? Why 20%? What is it about 20%? Well, 20% allows me to regain lost market share with a couple of core clients. So if there's legitimate reasoning behind the 20%, then we allow the 20%, but then we dig further and say, so what are you going to get out of that 20%? What does that mean for you? We always dig for that personal substance behind the why, and note that. Put that in a tickler file that you may have for that individual. So that's something you can use to coach them with moving forward. All right, if you could move on to the next slide, please. So some case studies. What I want to do here is just sort of run through a couple of firms without getting into names, and share with you the challenge they were up against, how we helped them, and what they were able to create after moving forward with some of these approaches that we help them with. A high-tech manufacturing firm struggling with their industry is in the defense industry, and there are these massive changes in how the military and how aeronautics, the aerospace industry is deploying technology and software. Massive, earth-shaking change. And one of the clear signs they knew would lead to success was if their clients were allowing them to come in with new design opportunities. So they were making tons of sales out of their catalog, but not a lot of brand new design opportunities that were integrating these industry-shaking changes. They were having less than 2 per rep per year of these design opportunities. And when we dug in and did some surveys and some interviews, we found that there was 27% of their sales team, business development team, and technical sales had above average engagement or engagement. So they had a very low threshold of employee engagement, highly disengaged sales team members. We were able to work with them and deploy some of our discrete training and consulting services. And within 6 months, their average rep had each rep had an average of 6 new design opportunities in process within 6 months. Their engagement scores nearly doubled, and they are now moving into a position of industry strength as all these platforms in the military and aerospace industry change. A significant turnaround in a very short amount of time, using many of the tools and the approaches that we covered earlier today. The last case study, if you could please, Jason. Working with a very large global professional services consulting analyst firm, very large player. They're one of the top 3 globally. They have a model of go-to-market where they use analysts, they're experts, they're technical sales, forget technical sales, they're experts, they're analysts, work in tandem with account managers. Their challenge was moving the needle with wallet share in existing accounts. They have massive penetration. Like I said, they're the name brand that everybody knows when people think of this kind of work, yet their growth trajectory was flat. They were very healthy, very profitable, but they weren't achieving what they wanted to achieve. We were able to deploy a change and a delta in their performance management approach, so many of the techniques of coaching that we described, as well as a tactical training for bringing the two silos together in cooperation and collaboration. And we were able to see in a very short amount of time with the pilot group, about 150 employees total, a 27% year-over-year increase in that core that core outcome measurement. They were able to also begin tracking the new leading indicator for success for them is net new executives in client briefings, something that they had never thought of or tracked prior. For them, looking at bringing new executives into briefings, executives from perhaps other verticals within these large enterprise clients, recognize that became a very clear path to growing the net contract value of that client, something that, again, we were able to help them identify and begin tracking. And culturally, begin to foster a partnership mindset. So these approaches allowing team members and allowing teams to come up with their own goals and to identify the leading indicators of success themselves, it relies on and taps into that human white-collar, particularly highly educated white-collar workers crave this, they want this, they need this. We were able to see some rapid increases in core metrics for business success. If you could, please, the next slide. So key takeaways. Sales, as we've said, sales is highly, highly measurable. It is one of the classic examples of an enterprise business unit that has metrics you can define. But what's communicated and what's tracked? Are you tracking and going with a too much, too late communication model and coaching model? Or is there value for you in assessing and understanding the leading indicators of success and how you can coach to those and really train people up so that they can be more successful more quickly, more consistently? Engagement, employee engagement, is a underutilized science, generally speaking, across any industry. Many managers understand it theoretically, but I'm here to tell you right now, employee engagement of sales teams is nearly never tracked or considered because of the false belief that money is the cure-all to motivating salespeople. It's not. Science tells us it's not. Research shows it's not. And anecdotally, I can prove to you from our clients that it is absolutely not the case. Engaging your team members will lead to consistent success. When you coach them to goals that they set themselves, provided you as managers are crystal clear on the standards of performance, again allows you to tap into key areas of engagement growth. And coaching those team members and those teams collectively or individually as team members, coaching them to those goals that they set, reminding them in a consistent, timely way on a semi-weekly, semi-monthly basis versus quarterly or annually, will genuinely have an impact and will allow them to stay within standard guidelines instead of deviating out of standard guidelines. And using those behavior and outcome standards and goals to drive perhaps new spiffs or incentive programs, contests, something that is fun and changing and interesting will foster focus on those areas that you see as key to your business success. To wrap it in summary, we see consistently measurable, quantifiable improvements in key strategic areas when you apply a data-driven mindfulness to coaching to standards and outcomes, coaching to standards and goals, excuse me, and allowing team members to create their own goals and leveraging the insights we've seen from employee engagement, specifically in the sales domain. Genuine short-term and consistent long-term increases in performance and ultimately the sales results that we're all measured by. If you could toggle forward, I think one last time. So that's me, at the top of the slide. It's a little bit of an older photograph, but nevertheless, I was tanner back then. It will be our pleasure. Sun K, he's our training director. For many of you, I know we've got about 10 minutes left. I'd love to answer questions. I would like to share that in next month, on December 1st, we are providing a one-day workshop that is going to be hosted by our friends here at Sales Search Partners in their Bedford office. It's a consultative selling skills workshop designed to give attendees, we call it cracking buyer behavior, and we also examine relationship management and the key questions that drive engagement of relationship as well as growth and sustaining those relationships. It's a great training opportunity, December 1st in Bedford. With that, I will hand the mic back over to Jason and happily answer any questions that may have been submitted through the course of the webinar.
Well, great, Dan. Thanks so much for the content. And as always, these complimentary webinars that we put on are usually about a 40-hour course packed into about 45 or 50 minutes. So inevitably, there's going to be a lot of questions immediately and then a lot of follow-up questions. So it's great that you're sharing your contact information. In just a moment, I'm going to share out via the chat messenger the address for where the training will be. And you can always reach out to us, and we'll make sure we send out via email to everybody here as well, verifying where our address is. So if anybody wants to come join us on December 1st, you're more than welcome to. A couple of questions that came in were just around. One was around the notion of, is money the motivator with salespeople, or is money more of a symbol of recognition for success in sales? And I'm kind of melding a couple of questions together here, but how do you, even though money is the motivator, I mean, money is not necessarily the motivator. It sometimes is the motivator when a salesperson is contacted by another organization who offers up some more money. So how do you use that, and how do you use that in the means of combating attrition and trying to retain your salespeople when considering how to structure their compensation plan and how they're rewarded?
Well, we see this is a key question that's been asked by many of the research firms, from Gallup to Towers Watson, as I alluded to earlier. So the typical response, the research-based response, when you look to the published information that's available, is that if all things are equal and the team member, the salesperson, feels like they have some commitment and some loyalty to the firm, they will not jump ship for a modest increase in salary. If it's a dramatic increase, if it's above market wages, then sure, they may. But the primary reason most salespeople leave is a failure within the organization to provide. This is what I've seen from my own supportive teams. They typically choose to leave when they see the opportunities they consistently bring in not being served. So they're out there, they're hustling, they're breaking eggs, doing what they got to do to make it happen, and they see the opportunities in their pipeline given short service. So they find that the work that they're putting in is not being equally supported internally, far more so than for financial reasons. I do think that it is important. Gosh, I'm pulling this off the top of my head. I want to say that it's Netflix, but there's a very much leading company out there that takes the approach when there's a challenge around pay. they give the benefit of the doubt to the employee, and they go ahead and incentivize that employee, and then hold that employee to a higher level of value that they must produce in order to substantiate the increase in salary or base. And that typically has some pretty positive results when it's transparent and it's clearly communicated up that they're going ahead and moving forward with that kind of a pay adjustment based on those key reasons. Provided, again, that the pay is within a market range. When we start to get out of market, that's when things get really funky and kind of all bets are off.
Well, good. And if by chance that there's follow-up questions to that as well, feel free to reach out to us directly offline or to Dan directly offline. The last question I have, only because we have time for one more question before we can get everybody back to their 1 o'clock meetings, is centered around metrics follow-up. So you mentioned it's healthy to put in place goals that are collaboratively identified with the staff and management. Is there a way that we can? Is there a common frequency of checking in on how we're trending towards those goals? Meaning that if you set an annual goal, for example, or a quarterly goal, it's probably not best to check in on it with the employee the day before year end or the day before quarter end. But what's the frequency of how we kind of measure that to keep everybody on the same page?
When we're working with annual goals, then there's a minimum of a monthly check-in. When we're working on 90-day goals, then there's typically a weekly check-in, and then between those two degrees of frequency. When we have sales performers who are falling below standard, then we get on them daily with performance reporting and outcomes reporting. So we'll have the sales manager check in and really act like a coach. We've even had some firms work with collaboratively getting responsibility off of one sales manager's plate so that he or she can spend a lot of time with a key player who may be performing below standard. And we always suggest and highly recommend that when you have a performer falling consistently below standard, that there is a very, very honest and forthright conversation around if this is the path for them in their career. If they commit that it is, then we give them that kind of support, perhaps daily coaching and support. But there's a very short term, and again, depending upon the state in which you reside and employment laws, et cetera, there's a 180-day or a 90-day path to exit or transference to a different role. So the degree of support really is dependent upon the length of the goal. So monthly for an annual goal, minimum. Weekly for a 90-day goal, minimum. And then if it's an issue or matter of deviation below standard, then we've even gone to daily check-ins.
Well, Dan, thanks so much for that answer, and thanks so much for the content and the time here. As I mentioned to everybody here on the call and on the webinar, Dan is Dan's in his company, Remission Consulting, is a group that we partner with on a regular basis, and we certainly encourage you to reach out if there's anything that you see as being of value that they can help you with moving forward into the future. As for myself, Jason, and the group here at Sales Search Partners, I want to say thanks to everybody for spending some time with us. And we obviously, there must have been some value in the content because we retained 100% of our audience today, so thanks for staying on from beginning to end. As I mentioned, we'll have a follow-up for you with an email, the slides from today's presentation, and if anybody has any questions for Dan regarding the content from today for further details on the December 1st session coming up, feel free to reach out to him directly. Otherwise, you can find us at salessearchpartners.com for updated jobs and contact information for all of our offices. So I want to say thank you to Dan and thank you to everybody for the time, and enjoy the rest of your day, folks.